Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yes, welcome back.
Today we're going to be talking about ecological intelligence.
Ooh, that sounds like a fun one.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, and we've got some great material to dig into.
Oh, awesome. What are we looking at today?
Well, we've got excerpts from Daniel Goleman's book, Ecological Intelligence, how knowing the hidden impacts of what we buy can change everything.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
And we've got a few supporting articles as well to kind of round things out.
Sounds like a good mix.
Yeah, so basically we're going to be exploring this idea of, can we really change the world just by knowing what's in the things we buy?
I like a very intriguing mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in.
All right, let's do it.
So Goleman kicks off his book with this really interesting story about a lead-painted toy car.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. The kind that, like, many of us probably had as kids.
Oh, for sure. I had tons of those.
But it's kind of crazy to think about how something so seemingly harmless
Right, like a little toy car.
could actually be really dangerous,
Yeah,
especially for kids.
exactly. And Goleman uses this anecdote to kind of illustrate this point about how a lack of what he calls ecological intelligence
Right. Yeah.
can have these unintended and sometimes really harmful consequences.
So what exactly does he mean by ecological intelligence?
Well, he defines it as like this awareness of the hidden impacts of our choices.
Okay, I see. So like not just thinking about the product itself, but like the whole life cycle and everything that goes into it.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, where do the materials come from? How is it made? What happens to it when we're done with it?
And how all of that impacts the environment and people's health.
Exactly. And so when we're not aware of those things, we can end up making choices that we might regret later.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's not just about lead paint, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There are so many other chemicals that we're exposed to every day without even realizing it.
What kind of things?
Well, Goleman talks about all these different chemicals that are used in everyday products.
Right, like in our food, our clothes, cleaning products. Yeah, all sorts of things. And he points out that a lot of these chemicals haven't been rigorously tested for safety.
Oh, wow. That's a little concerning.
Yeah, especially when you think about the long-term effects.
Yeah. Who knows what kind of impact these chemicals could be having on our health?
And that's something that scientists are still trying to figure out.
Right. It can take years or even decades for the effects of some of these chemicals to become apparent.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so that's why this whole idea of ecological intelligence is so important.
Yeah, it's about being proactive and trying to make informed choices, even when there's still a lot that we don't know.
Right. And that can be really tough because there's so much information out there and it can be hard to know what to trust.
Totally. And it seems like different parts of the world have completely different approaches to this whole issue of chemical regulation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Goleman talks about that too.
Like, what are some of the differences?
Well, for instance, Europe often operates under what's called the precautionary principle.
The precautionary principle?
Yeah, have you heard of that?
I'm not sure I have.
So it basically means that if a chemical is suspected of being harmful,
Even if they don't have like definitive proof?
exactly, it's banned until its safety can be proven.
Oh, wow. So it's like better safe than sorry.
Exactly. And this kind of shifts the burden of proof onto the manufacturers.
So they have to prove that a chemical is safe before they can use it in products.
Right, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Why should consumers have to be the guinea pigs?
Yeah, that seems fair.
But it sounds like that's not really how things work in the US, right?
No, not really.
It often takes like conclusive evidence of harm before a chemical is restricted or banned here.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, and so you end up with these situations where chemicals that are banned in Europe are still allowed in products sold in the US.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, sure, like phthalates.
Phthalates. Have you heard of those?
Maybe
Vaguely.
So they're these chemicals that are commonly found in plastics and fragrances,
Oh, okay.
and there's a lot of debate about their potential health effects.
Mm-hmm. Like what kind of health effects?
Some studies have linked them to things like hormone disruption,
Yeah.
reproductive problems, and even certain types of cancer.
Oh, wow. That's scary.
And yet, they're still widely used in American products.
Huh. So what are we supposed to do as consumers? Are we just supposed to avoid anything made with plastic?
Well, it's not always that simple. Goleman talks about this term chemicals of concern.
Okay.
And these are basically chemicals that haven't been definitively proven to be harmful.
But there's enough evidence to raise some red flags.
Exactly. And so it's not just phthalates. We're talking about things like BPA in certain plastics, parabens in cosmetics, and even some flame retardants that are used in furniture.
Wow. It's like everywhere you look, there's something potentially harmful.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the research on the long-term effects of these chemicals often lags behind their use in consumer products.
So by the time we figure out that something is dangerous, it could be too late.
That's a worry, isn't it?
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, how do we make informed choices when we don't even know what we're looking for?
It feels like a bit of a minefield out there.
It really does.
You're constantly bombarded with all these products and all these claims, and it's like, how do you know what's actually safe and what's not?
Yeah, I feel that.
And that's where things start to get really interesting.
Oh, how so?
Well, Goleman argues that if we as consumers had access to more information about what's in our products and how they're made,
Right, like more transparency.
exactly, then we could start to make more informed choices.
Yeah, I mean, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we'll be digging into in part 2 of this deep dive.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it.
So where do we go from here? How do we get this information?
Well, that's where this concept of transparency comes in.
Okay.
So Goleman argues that if we as consumers, if we had access to more information about what's in our products, how they're made,
Right.
then we could start making more informed choices.
It makes sense.
And he actually talks about tools like Good Guide.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of that?
I have. I've heard of Good Guide.
Yeah, so it's a website and an app.
Right.
And it rates products
It's like,
based on their environmental health and social impacts.
so it's kind of like having a pocket-sized detective for, like, sustainable shopping.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
can just, like, scan a barcode and see how the product stacks up.
Exactly. And you can look up specific products too.
Yeah. That's really good. But, like, does it actually change how people shop?
Well, Goleman shares a story about this one shopper
Yeah.
who switched sunscreens after discovering a potentially carcinogenic ingredient through Good Guide.
Oh, wow.
So it seems like, at least anecdotally, it can have an impact.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah,
Knowledge is power, right?
exactly.
If you know that a product might contain harmful ingredients or, wasn't produced ethically,
Right.
you might think twice about buying it.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about individual consumers either.
Right.
Think about institutions like universities or government agencies.
Oh, yeah.
They have massive buying power, and their choices can really influence entire industries.
It's true. They could have a real ripple effect.
But wouldn't it be really difficult for a large institution to track the sustainability of everything they buy?
Yeah.
Like, think about the complexity of their supply chains.
Oh, it's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
Goleman actually uses the example of the University of Wisconsin's purchasing director,
Okay.
who is really struggling to implement sustainable procurement practices.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because there's often a lack of transparency within these really complex global supply chains.
Right.
So even if an institution wants to be eco-conscious, they might not have the information they need to make those choices.
So how do you even begin to address that?
Well, there are some tools and resources out there.
Okay, like what?
Goleman highlights this free open source platform called Earthster.
Earthster?
Have you heard of that?
I don't think so.
So it was designed specifically to help businesses,
Okay.
including large institutions,
Right.
assess and improve the ecological impacts of their products and supply chains.
So it's like a sustainability consultant for businesses.
Yeah, in a way. Yes.
That's cool.
So it uses something called life cycle assessment data, or LCA data.
Okay.
And this basically means it takes into account the environmental impact of a product from its creation to its disposal.
Wow, so like the whole shebang.
Yeah,
Got
like raw material extraction, manufacturing, transportation use, and even end-of-life management.
That's really comprehensive.
It is, and then it can benchmark a product against industry averages and highlight areas for improvement.
Oh, wow. So it gives companies like a holistic view of a product's ecological footprint.
Exactly.
That's awesome. But how does that translate into actual change?
Okay, so imagine you're the purchasing director for a large university,
Okay.
and you want to buy paper products that are sustainably sourced and have a low environmental impact.
Right.
Earthster can help you compare different brands and products based on their LCA data.
So you could actually set specific ecological criteria as part of your purchasing process.
Exactly.
That's huge.
It is, and this could lead to a situation where companies, knowing that institutions are using Earthster and making purchasing decisions based on this LCA data,
Right.
they'd be incentivized to improve the sustainability of their products and their supply chains.
Because they know that's what buyers are looking for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like creating a system where sustainability becomes a competitive advantage.
I like that.
Yeah, and Goleman argues that this kind of transparency can lead to what he calls virtuous cycles.
Virtuous cycles.
Yeah, so as consumers and institutions demand more sustainable products, companies are driven to innovate and make improvements,
Right.
which in turn leads to further demand for even better
It's
products.
like a positive feedback loop.
Exactly.
And we've seen some real-world examples of this, haven't we?
Absolutely.
Like, remember when P&G launched its Tide cold water detergent?
Oh,
It
yeah.
was a game changer because it offered these environmental benefits. Using cold water saves energy.
Right.
But it didn't compromise on price or performance.
Totally. It was a win-win for consumers and the environment.
Exactly. And didn't Walmart do something similar with their packaging?
Yes, they implemented this eco-friendly packaging mandate,
Okay.
which pushed their suppliers to really rethink how they package and ship products.
And what was the result of that?
It led to some really cool innovations in packaging design, reducing waste and transportation costs.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and those are just a couple of examples.
And there are companies like Yosta,
Oh, yeah.
which Goleman features in his book,
Right.
and they've built their entire business model around ecological intelligence and transparency.
They have. It's fascinating.
Yeah, tell me more about them.
Well, they empower consumers to trace their produce back to the source.
Okay.
So you can actually connect directly with the farmers who grew it.
Uh-huh.
You can scan a sticker on a piece of fruit
Oh, wow.
and learn about the farm where it was grown, the farmer's story, and their sustainable practices.
It's like bringing back that human connection to our food.
Yeah, you're not just buying a product, you're engaging with a whole system and the people behind it.
Exactly. And it makes the idea of sustainable consumption so much more tangible and meaningful.
It does, but even with these really inspiring examples,
Right.
achieving true transparency isn't without its challenges.
That's true. Goleman
Wow.
does address some of the complexities and potential pitfalls.
He does. So auditing those complex global supply chains is incredibly difficult,
Yeah.
and current auditing practices often fall short.
In a lot of way.
Well, Goleman shares the experience of Dragor,
Okay.
who inspected factories in developing countries
Right.
and found that many audits were superficial and missed crucial issues.
So just because a company claims to be sustainable,
Right.
that doesn't necessarily mean that their entire supply chain is ethical and transparent.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we need to be critical consumers of information
Right.
and not just take every sustainability claim at face value.
Yeah, greenwashing is a real problem.
It is, and there's a real need for more standardized metrics and robust certification systems
Okay.
to ensure the credibility and comparability of these claims.
It feels like we're just scratching the surface of a much bigger issue here.
We are, and Goleman emphasizes that creating a truly transparent and sustainable marketplace will require collaboration
Between
in businesses, NGOs, and governments.
Yeah, it's a systemic challenge that goes beyond individual choices.
It does.
It feels a little overwhelming, but also kind of inspiring,
Yeah.
knowing that there are people and organizations out there working toward a more sustainable future gives me hope.
Yeah, it does feel like a pretty monumental task.
It is.
But, every journey starts with a single step.
That's true.
And I think what I'm taking away from all this is that we can't just rely on companies to self-regulate,
Right.
We as consumers have a role to play here
Absolutely.
in demanding greater transparency and holding businesses accountable.
Yeah, Gurman's book is really a call to action for all of us.
It is.
Businesses need to embrace transparency, consumers need to demand it, and governments need to create the frameworks and regulations that make it all possible. It's about creating a system where doing good is good for business,
Exactly.
where sustainability isn't just some marketing tactic,
Right.
but like a core value that drives innovation and creates genuine value for everyone.
Precisely. And Goleman leaves us with a really powerful question.
Oh, what's that?
Knowing what you now know about ecological intelligence, how might you use this knowledge to make more informed choices as a consumer?
Wow. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
It does.
It's a question that challenges us to look beyond the price tag and consider the true cost of the things we buy.
Yeah, the hidden costs.
Exactly. And it's not about being perfect
Right.
or making like radical changes overnight.
No, it's a process.
It's about taking small steps, making conscious choices,
Yeah.
and using our collective power as consumers to shape the marketplace and drive positive change.
Absolutely.
So if you're listening to this and feeling inspired,
Yeah.
I encourage you to check out some of the resources that we've mentioned today,
Yeah.
like Good Guide and Earthster.
Yes, those are great resources.
And of course, pick up a copy of Daniel Goleman's book.
Ecological Intelligence.
Yeah, it's a real eye-opener and a great starting point for anyone who wants to learn more about making those conscious consumer choices.
It's a journey of discovery,
It is.
and it's one that we can all take together.
Absolutely.
By embracing ecological intelligence, we can create a world where businesses and consumers thrive,
Right.
and our planet is protected for generations to come.
And that's a future worth striving for.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into ecological intelligence.
Yes, thanks for listening, everyone.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep making those conscious choices.
See you next time.